and welcome to a new episode of our podcast, Lead the Future. Change the conversation, an unedited, honest conversation to create the future. I'm Arjan Visser, your host, Futurist, and join me as I chat with my friend Matt Goddard on self leadership, future, and peers. Matt is the founder of 3626 and an executive coach to CEOs who want to actually add more humanity in their leadership. So, Matt, welcome back to the show. I'm really happy to have you back.
Great. I mean, it's lovely to be invited back. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I am. It's a pleasure to always a pleasure to speak with you. But good to be here.
that's so nice to hear because I know I give people in the podcast such a hard time by asking
We're not.
vulnerable questions. So, um, the first question actually is when we think of self leadership and personal development, how do you, as an executive coach, receive coaching yourself?
Mm. I think my initial answer is very badly.
That's a common theme
Yeah,
through
yeah,
that question. Yeah.
So, and that sounds really arrogant, but it's not. It's just that actually, sometimes when you're in a coaching space and someone asks you a coaching question, it's sometimes difficult not to have a kind of wry smile or a kind of I kind of know this kind of type of question, and that immediately creates a narrative in your mind that you're thinking, where they're going. So in that sense, it's I probably prefer to come to coaching with a little bit of ignorance of those kind of styles and modalities, because I think it would be more beneficial to me in that way. But how do I receive coaching from a more helpful response?
Yeah.
uh, might be actually uh, I understand the craft, I understand the trade, the profession, I should say, and I'm always open. I'm always curious to learn more about myself, more about the world in which I live and operate, and where I can improve, so that I am, as a coach, you have a commitment to continually learn.
Hmm.
And last week, I spent a whole day with Perry Marshall as part of a bigger group to lean in a little bit more into some of the areas in our individual businesses where I need some learning and development and input, so that I can be as good as I can be, or as best as I can be for my clients. So if I'm not investing in my own development and learning, then there's a danger that I will stagnate, and I don't want my clients to have stagnated Matt, because that wouldn't be a good thing.
Yeah. So what I hear between the lines is the answer that you have an allergy for formal coaching styles like coaching by the book. If you recognize the language, you think, yeah, oh, that's the question, this is the perspective, this is where you're going, this is the answer you expect. And you're actually, in a way, looking more for an authentic, live through question, maybe example. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. In that, when I'm working with Perry, I know his backstory. I know that he comes from a place of authenticity, and I trust him to call me out on the stuff in a very authentic Perry way.
Yeah.
And the same when we speak, it's like I trust you to call me out on anything that I might have said, that or might be living in terms of a belief system that actually isn't constructive to supporting my clients, and also being free, unconstrained from speaking to my clients and asking them some of those tough questions that I've got had to appreciate myself, because there's that old adage, you can't give away what you don't have. And so in that sense, it's having somebody of a experience and authenticity and professionalism ask me challenging questions enable me to become a better person, and also then see how I can add more value into the lives and businesses of my clients.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and especially when we have to think hard, when we want to think back of when we were 20, we're not in the phase that we.
I think very hard about that.
Oh yeah. I didn't want to address that topic actually. I didn't want to go into pain. But the thing is, like, we're not looking for a certain style or a certain coat to put on. Like, there is so much training out there where you learn certain ways to phrase and ask questions. All valid, but in the age that we are in, we equally value life experience, business experience, and an authentic voice.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I do appreciate that sometimes, as a coach or being coached, I do appreciate the way in which questions are asked, so that they are not laced with any bias. So
Absolutely.
we spoke briefly before about clean language, and that's a modality, let's say, that was developed by David Grove. And David spent many hours looking and exploring language, and how you can ask a question that is as pure or as clean as possible from a bias.
Yeah.
I find myself now, when I started using clean language, I was very, let's say, by the book. But more, and as I've developed in both my coaching style, my underlying guiding principles, and my experience, I'm able to ask clean questions from a more authentic place. And so I'll be asking people, if they say, "Oh, well, I'm getting angry now," I'll say, "Okay, what kind of angry is that angry?" Because that's a very clean way of asking them to express themselves.
Mm.
Because I could say, "Oh, how's that anger kind of impacting you?" Well, that's an assumption, that's a bias, because it's assuming that the anger is impacting them. And it might be just, no, it's not impacting me, but I just notice some anger within me.
Yeah, well, when we got to know each other back in 2015, I think it was in Billund, on a conference where we were facilitating with pieces of plastic, and
sometimes called Lego.
Sometimes, yes, yeah, or bricks. And trademark.
Indeed.
I remember you spoke about clean language. Actually, that's how we connected a couple of years later. And in the podcast, we also talked about it last time. In the podcast, I talk a lot about your future perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That's for me as a futurist, that's, I think, the most exciting thing, the future perspective, and everything that is between now and the future that's emerging is interesting as well. But if you don't have the end in mind, that perspective, and in preparation for the podcast, I was just thinking, like, the clean language, could that be? And actually, this question is not clean language in that way. Well, I was just thinking, like, what if I use clean language to describe the perspective of the future that I have not yet seen before? I'd probably see it with the eyes of my heart and not with my physical eyes. It's new. Would clean language help me not to actually store it immediately in a box that has a label from the past on it, like a mental box? So could clean language help me to be non-bias in receiving new perspectives, as in the inner dialogue? Probably the answer is yes. And then probably the wrong question is how, because that's for a futurist always the nasty question. It's always about the what. So in this way, I also would ask you, like, what would be the trick to have clean language in putting words to something you have not seen before, in a way that it has more value, because you're not prejudiced, you're not judgmental, you're not, your ego doesn't kick in by, I know where this fits in.
Yeah. So I guess the starting point for that is read a great book like Metaphors of Mind by James Lawley and Penny Tompkins. They take you through the clean language approach, and rightly so, they lean on the work of David Grove and explain his work in the context of their work. So, and we are talking really about symbolic language. And so, in terms of a starting point, I might even interject and say, for what purpose the future? Because that's a clean question, in that I'm not assuming that there's a purpose for the future, or that anybody has a particular assumptive about the future. But I'm just simply asking for what purpose. And so people could say, well, it helped me do X, Y, and Z, and then we're into a conversation. Or if someone says, I've got an idea about something, okay, so for what purpose that idea? Because it helps us get to the objective of where the person wants to go to without adding lots of, oh, well, this is what you need to do to understand your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer the question?
Well, it's definitely a starting point, you know. I just thinking, I'm just thinking really hard how to have a clean next question without being biased, but I give up. Like, what would be the benefit for you? Making already the assumption it is beneficial for you, if that is also part of your inner dialogue you have when you're processing your own perspective.
Yeah. And I think that's really helpful. We were talking just prior to our conversation about the woes of this week with my car breaking down. And at one point, it was going to be very expensive to fix. Almost half the value of the car as it stands at the moment. I could, from an internal narrative, get quite reactive to that. Think, oh goodness, I'm going to have to pay out a ton of cash, or actually, as my dad used to say, the joys of motoring, and just kind of just put it down to that. But actually, having the experience of asking clean questions, I am better able to personally calibrate where I'm at. So if I notice something rising in me, whether that is, oh, well, it is what it is, or some anxiety or some concern, in terms of my internal narrative, I might ask myself just to quieten down. I'm just going to do some breathing exercise, or even just notice that, oh, there's a little bit of anxiety going on. For what purpose that anxiety? It might be the internal question, or what would be the implication if I didn't have that anxiety? Because I'm just beginning to get curious then. And I tend to find that for me, but also I've noticed it in my clients, when we're a little bit more curious about where those things are stemming from, that actually it helps our psychology to be able to kind of work out that actually we are psychologically safe. We're not, yes, it might cost me some pennies. I'd have to go and do some more work, or take that out of savings, or make an investment in the car. But I don't need to be anxious about it, because in this present moment, I am safe. And so the mental narrative of asking, What's the implication of that feeling or that noticing? What's the purpose of it? It might be, okay, the purpose is to try to help me self-medicate any kind of worry or future catastrophizing. And so noticing that I'm able to better calibrate and stay calm in the situation, rather than responding to some of those more anxiety-inducing thought models.
So actually, I hear you use the words for the question, actually, for what purpose is it? Um, to me, it sounds like, although it's an event, although it triggers you, or maybe it's even an incident, you take out the option that is actually the cause for how you're feeling and how you will react or behave, by just actually, in a way, neutralizing it as it is a force, it is wind. How do I adjust my sail to at least make sure that I keep moving the right direction where I want to go, and not be derailed by it. So that's what I hear you say, that it's still a trigger, but you take away that it is a cause for your next actions.
Yeah, I'm seeing the event as a neutral event, because it is ultimately a neutral event. There's, my car broke. The car wasn't angry with me and decided to stop working. There's a mechanical issue. We could spend the whole time thinking about the cause of that, but there is a mechanical issue. It is not down to me being a good boy or a bad boy. It is a neutral event, and so in that sense, allowing anxiety or even a kind of like, oh well, devil may care kind of view, is a response to that may not necessarily be helpful to me. So that's why I asked for what purpose that event.
And I just imagine it, and it's hard to give examples when we talk about a future perspective. But when we see things in our future perspective, we use futurizing processes. We talked about it on your podcast recently, and it's one of the things I love to do. Just futurize. It's not just escaping, because you go from that future, you backcast to actually actions to do today, tomorrow. But it sounds really valuable to actually ask that question, to find out what the purpose is of those things that are part of your perspective. Because I believe your purpose is now. Your purpose is not coming. You're not finding your purpose somewhere down the line. It is around you. And but if you're more intentional, well, you can align yourself with it, which is definitely a part of the futurizing process. But by asking the question, what the purpose of it is, what I see as my horizon, with what people I dream to work with what destination I dream to have my next house, whatever the dreams are, ask that question, and actually by that drawing it closer, without having we talked about anxiety. With the future, I always think the future should not give an anxiety. Then you're projecting fears from the past and impossibilities on something ahead of you. But the future should be exciting. It's full of opportunities. But they could, at the same time, be also the trigger that derails you, and you're going to live in utopia instead of the now.
Well, I mean, there's a great example of that in the story of Paul in the Bible being shipwrecked, which you'll find in Ephesians, sorry. And the story of Paul is that actually he's on a boat being taken to Rome, and the wind blows up because he's able to stay calm in that situation, he's making some great decisions. Now, all around him, people are making decisions based out of fear and or bias. So the story goes that they're being shipwrecked, and Paul says, well, we should anchor here because it'll be safer. No, we're going to press on. So, okay, going to press on. So then the storm blows up and they get blown off course to, rather than going to Rome, they end up in North Africa and then get shipwrecked in Malta. At that point, the guard of the prisoners wants to kill all the prisoners because he's fearful about them escaping and what's going to happen to him. And other people are worried about dying because they're being shipwrecked. But Paul's able to stay calm in that situation and bring a sense of helpful questioning and guidance because of that, calm internal narrative. So the future was emergent in those situations because no one could tell where they were going to end up or what might happen. It was an emergent future. It wasn't a planned thing, but even in emergent situations, staying calm and calibrating self can be really helpful.
Well, what I take out this example is that if you have this inner dialogue maturing from the inside out, call it spiritual maturity, emotional intelligence, probably the whole mix, then you can make the right decision in a moment like this, instead of a reaction based off fear or a memory. And so it is really, and in this example, interesting because the reactions would have killed the future, while the decision making still actually kept the future in perspective, and the future was still an option, and probably there was a detour, through another island. We don't know the route, we know where we want to go, so we need to have a spiritual maturity, like for wise, smart, future-proof decision making. That's what I
might refer to that as being grounded. And so being grounded in your understanding, being grounded in a belief system, or being grounded in a set of principles, helps you to remain calm in situations that others may find difficult to stay calm in, not because it's some kind of competition, but because it creates clarity of mind.
Yes, but I don't want to put that in tension with the clean language. But I think that it gives the foundation, and call it grounded, call it maturity. It's not about knowledge of principles. No, actually, it's about life. And based on asking the right question, you take it makes it neutral, the trigger, positive or negative, and it doesn't derail you.
No, because it can be one of those three things. It can be positive, it can be negative, or it could be neutral. So asking the question helps you calibrate that. When I worked with Jamie Smart, he would always say, well, if a saber-toothed tiger came in the room, you would have to ask yourself some internal questions, because and that would be, for what purpose am I feeling anxious? Now, that wouldn't happen in a kind of linear process. It'll be kind of microseconds, because you'd know what to do, hopefully. But it's important to understand that actually one of those responses, if I thought, oh well, I'm not going to worry, one of those responses could be actually very negative for me as an individual, as a human, being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So I want to be taking the right response rather than seeing it as something playful and playing with a saber-toothed tiger, because I would be consumed. I don't know if that makes any clearer.
Yeah, I don't know. No, it's not a daily experience I have.
Not for me.
But to wrap up the the podcast to keep it a little bit bite-sized. We're definitely going to continue this conversation offline and in the next podcast. I want to thank you, Matt, for your honest answers, your wisdom, your vulnerability. And actually, I want to invite everyone who's listening, mainly actually on everyone who's recognizing that they are a leader, and leadership starts with leading yourself. And probably there is something like a discontent with future perspective, where you're at, or maybe what we just talked about, that you find that your inner dialogue is actually not helping you to neutralize all these events and actually take you off course every time. Then I really invite you to connect through businessrevivalist.com/coach, or just send a direct message based on whatever channel you have been watching this show. Or if you have listened it through your favorite podcast app, then the link is in the details. But reach out. Don't waste another day. Get yourself on track and start leading yourself. Because there is one purpose for that. And that's you deserve it. So I want to thank you again, Matt, and hope to see you soon in our next episode.
Hi, it's a pleasure. Always good to talk. And I would say all those characteristics that you you mentioned there about our conversation, I would mirror back. So to you, a guy of wisdom, a guy of strength and personal grounding. So thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Take care.